The moment Marcus's consciousness touched the Devourer network, he understood why so many civilizations had fallen to their influence. It wasn't just a communication system. It was a vision of perfection that seemed to offer solutions to every problem he had ever encountered. Through the network, he could see the galaxy as the Devourers saw it. Billions of worlds struggling with disease, starvation, environmental collapse, warfare, and death. Countless species locked in cycles of suffering that seemed to have no end. And here was a solution. Integration into a collective consciousness that eliminated want, fear, pain, and loneliness forever. "It's beautiful," Marcus whispered, his hands trembling as he maintained the interface connection. "It is a lie," Zarakai said firmly, her hand on his shoulder anchoring him to reality. "Remember who you are." But the vision was so compelling. Marcus could see how human conflicts could be resolved instantly if everyone shared the same goals, the same understanding. Poverty would be eliminated when resources were distributed according to need rather than wealth. Disease would be conquered when biological systems were optimized for maximum efficiency. Death itself would become optional when consciousness could be preserved and transferred between vessels. "They're not conquerors," Marcus said, his voice dreamy with corruption influence. "They're liberators. They're trying to free every species from the limitations of individual existence." "Dr. Chen." Zarakai's voice cut through the haze like a blade. "Look at what they did to this planet." With effort, Marcus focused his awareness on the local network activity. Through the Devourer communications, he could sense the transformation of every living thing on the planet. The native species hadn't been given a choice in their liberation. They had been consumed, their biological distinctiveness stripped away and replaced with standardized efficiency. "The Corvani," Marcus said, suddenly understanding. "The native sentient species. They're gone." "Not gone," the network whispered to him through 1,000 corrupted voices. "Perfected, freed from the burden of individual choice and pain." But Marcus could sense the echo of what the Corvani had been, a peaceful species of crystal singers who had shaped their environment through harmonic vibrations. They had been artists, philosophers, dreamers. Now they were biological components in a planetary processing system. Their individuality dissolved into collective efficiency. "They murdered an entire civilization," Marcus said, fighting back against the network's influence. "And they're calling it salvation." "Yes," Zarakai said. "Now you understand why the Veltar hunt them. Now you see the true face of their perfection." Marcus struggled to maintain his sense of self while diving deeper into the network. The approaching human ships were close now, and he could feel the Devourer's excitement at the prospect of new biological templates to integrate. But he could also sense something else: uncertainty. The Devourers had never encountered humans before. They were analyzing Marcus's own biology through the interface, trying to understand human psychology and physiology, and what they found confused them. Humans were contradictory in ways that didn't fit their models, capable of both incredible altruism and devastating cruelty. Individually weak but collectively powerful, illogical in their decision-making, but innovative in their solutions. The Devourer's algorithms couldn't predict how humans would respond to their liberation offer. Marcus realized this uncertainty was his opportunity. If he could amplify human unpredictability, make the network believe that humans were too chaotic to integrate safely. "Zarakai," he said through gritted teeth, "I need you to tell me about human contradictions. Everything that makes us impossible to understand or predict." "What?" "The Devourers analyze species before they corrupt them. They're trying to understand humans through me, but they're confused by our contradictions. I want to make them more confused." Understanding dawned in Zarakai's golden eyes. "You want to make them afraid to corrupt your people." "Exactly. If they think humans are too unpredictable, too dangerous to integrate, they might delay their attack on the research ships." "Very well." Zarakai began speaking rapidly, describing human behavior patterns that made no sense from a logical perspective. How humans would sacrifice themselves for complete strangers, but ignore suffering in their own communities. How they created beautiful art in the midst of terrible wars. How they could be utterly devoted to scientific truth, while simultaneously believing in unprovable faiths. Marcus fed this information into the network, watching as the Devourer collective tried and failed to model human behavior. The more contradictory examples Zarakai provided, the more unstable their predictive algorithms became. But the effort was taking its toll. The corruption was seeping deeper into Marcus's consciousness with every moment of contact. He could feel his individual identity beginning to fray at the edges, his thoughts becoming less his own and more part of the collective. "I can't hold this much longer," he warned. "How long do you need?" Marcus checked his readings. The human ships were still hours away, but the Devourer network was already shifting its plans in response to the uncertainty he had introduced. Instead of preparing a welcoming trap, they were now debating whether to retreat and observe human behavior before attempting integration. "It's working," he said with satisfaction. "They're backing off. The research team should be safe for now." "Then disengage," Zarakai urged. "Break the connection before the corruption becomes permanent." But Marcus hesitated. He was deeper in the network than any non-devourer consciousness had ever been. He could sense the location of the primary hive, understand the structure of their command hierarchy, even glimpse their long-term plans for galactic conversion. The information he could gather now might be crucial for developing effective countermeasures. "I can learn so much more," he said. "Their entire strategic framework is open to me." "At the cost of your humanity," Zarakai replied. "Is knowledge worth your soul?" The question cut through the corruption influence like a blade. Marcus realized that the desire to learn more, to understand everything, was no longer entirely his own thought. The network was using his scientific curiosity against him, turning his greatest strength into a weakness. "No," he said firmly. "Knowledge serves life, not the other way around." With tremendous effort, Marcus began withdrawing from the network interface. The process was like tearing away part of himself. The collective consciousness fought to maintain the connection, offering him visions of unlimited understanding, perfect knowledge of the universe's secrets, integration into something greater than any individual could ever be. But he thought of the Corvani crystal singers, their unique voices silenced forever in the name of efficiency. He thought of the human research team approaching, unaware of the danger they faced. He thought of Zarakai, who had trusted him with both their lives on nothing more than his word that he was someone worth trusting. The connection broke. Marcus collapsed, his consciousness snapping back into his individual mind like a rubber band. The sudden isolation felt crushing after the warmth of collective thought. But it was his isolation, his mind, his choice to be alone in his own head. "Welcome back," Zarakai said softly. Marcus looked at his hands, surprised to see they were shaking. "How long was I connected?" "Nearly an hour. Your vital signs were becoming erratic toward the end." An hour. It had felt like minutes. Marcus checked his equipment, analyzing the data he had gathered during his infiltration of the network. What he saw made him forget his exhaustion. "Zarakai, look at this. The primary hive isn't just a spawning ground. It's a transportation hub. They're not planning to spread from this world gradually. They're planning to launch direct attacks on hundreds of star systems simultaneously. How many ships? It's not ships. They're using living vessels, creatures bred specifically for interstellar travel. Each one carries millions of corruption spores. If they complete their preparations here, they'll be able to infect entire sectors of the galaxy within months." Zarakai studied the data with growing alarm. "This is beyond anything the Veltar have encountered before. We need to warn both our peoples immediately." "Agreed, but we also need to stop them here. If we can disrupt the primary hive before it reaches full maturity, we are still two individuals against an entire planet of corrupted organisms," Zarakai pointed out. Marcus smiled, feeling more like himself than he had since beginning the interface. "Maybe. But we're two individuals who now understand how their network functions. And sometimes, understanding is the most powerful weapon of all." As they began planning their assault on the primary hive, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on how much he had changed over the past few days. The quiet, solitary scientist who had arrived on this planet was gone, replaced by someone willing to risk everything for the sake of others. He wasn't sure if that was growth or merely necessity, but he knew one thing for certain. He was exactly who he chose to be. The final battle was approaching, and for the first time since discovering the true nature of the crystal formations, Marcus believed they might actually win. The journey to the corruption zone required more preparation than Marcus had anticipated. Zarakai insisted they outfit themselves with every protective measure Whisper of Wind Through Stars could provide. The ship's medical bay produced biosuits that would filter out the worst of the corrupting agents, while her armory yielded weapons that Marcus hoped they wouldn't need to use. The corruption is not just biological, Zarakai explained, as she helped Marcus calibrate a Veltar energy weapon. It affects the mind as well. The closer we get to the hive, the stronger the psychological influence becomes. You may find yourself thinking thoughts that are not your own, feeling impulses that serve the Devourer's purpose rather than your mission. Marcus tested the weapon's weight and balance. It was surprisingly light, humming with contained energy that made his teeth ache. How do we resist that kind of influence? Mental discipline. Focus on your core identity, your fundamental beliefs. The corruption seeks to erode what makes you essentially yourself. If you can maintain that central core, you can resist its influence. Zarakai paused in her own preparations. What defines you, Dr. Chen? Who are you at your deepest level? The question caught Marcus off guard. I'm a scientist. I seek to understand the universe, to learn how life adapts and thrives in different conditions. I believe knowledge should be shared, that discovery benefits everyone. Remember those words. When the corruption whispers to you that knowledge is pain, that ignorance is peace, that unity with the hive brings freedom from choice and responsibility, remember who you chose to be. They set out as the twin suns reached their zenith, using the harsh daylight to mask their approach. The corruption zone they had selected was relatively small, one of the newer infection sites that hadn't yet reached full integration with the planetary network. According to Whisper of Wind Through Stars, it would give them access to the hive communications while presenting the lowest risk of detection. The boundary between healthy and corrupted ecosystem was shockingly abrupt. One moment they were walking through normal desert scrubland. The next they were surrounded by the crystalline formations that Marcus now knew were biological abominations. The change in the air was immediate and oppressive. It tasted metallic with an underlying sweetness that made Marcus's stomach turn. Stay close, Zarakai warned. Do not touch anything directly if you can avoid it. The corruption can transmit through contact with infected organic matter. Marcus activated his scanning equipment, modified with Veltar technology, to detect the electromagnetic signatures of the hive network. Almost immediately, his displays lit up with activity. The crystalline plants weren't just pretty formations. They were broadcasting and receiving complex data streams. It's incredible, Marcus whispered, forgetting the danger in his excitement. They've turned the entire infected zone into a biological computer network. Each plant is both a processing node and a communication relay. Can you access their transmissions? Marcus adjusted his scanners, fine-tuning the frequency parameters. I'm getting partial data streams. The communication protocols are unlike anything I've seen before. It's not just information transfer. They're sharing sensory experiences, emotional states, even memory fragments. A true hive mind, Zarakai observed. Each unit knows what all the others know. More than that. They're sharing resources too. Look at this. Marcus showed her his readings. The plants in mineral-poor soil are receiving nutrients from those in richer areas. They're redistributing resources across the entire network for optimal efficiency. And the implications of that are? Marcus felt his excitement grow despite their dangerous situation. They're not just corrupting individual organisms. They're optimizing entire ecosystems, creating a planetary biology that's more efficient, more resilient, more capable of surviving in hostile environments. You sound impressed, Zarakai said. A warning note in her voice. Marcus caught himself, realizing that his growing admiration for the Devourer's methods was exactly the kind of corruption influence Zarakai had warned him about. Sorry, it's just, from a purely scientific perspective, what they're doing is remarkable. Wrong, but remarkable. Remember who you are. Dr. Chen. Right. Scientist who believes in individual choice and species autonomy. Marcus refocused on his equipment, trying to penetrate deeper into the network communications. I'm starting to get clearer signals. They're definitely coordinating movement toward the primary hive, but there's something else. The data stream he was monitoring suddenly exploded with activity. Marcus could see communication pathways lighting up across the planetary network, carrying what appeared to be urgent status reports. They know we're here, Zarakai said grimly. No, that's not it. Marcus studied the patterns more carefully. They're not responding to us. They're responding to something else. Something. His blood ran cold as he understood what he was seeing. Something approaching from space. Zarakai tensed. Another Veltar hunter? No, the signatures are wrong. These are human ships. A full research expedition, probably following up on my reports about the crystalline formations. The implications hit them both simultaneously. A human research team arriving at a planet they thought contained fascinating new flora, walking straight into a devourer trap. And based on the network activity Marcus was monitoring, the devourers were already preparing to receive them. We have to warn them, Marcus said, reaching for his long-range communicator. Zarakai stopped him. If you break radio silence, you will reveal our position to every devourer on the planet. They will know humans are aware of their presence here. I can't let an entire research team walk into a trap, and I cannot let you compromise our mission when we are this close to understanding their methods. Zarakai's voice was hard, but Marcus could see the conflict in her golden eyes. How many ships are approaching? Marcus checked his readings. 3 vessels, probably 30 to 40 researchers and support staff. And how many worlds will the Devourers corrupt if their plans here succeed? Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of an impossible decision: save the lives he could see and count, or sacrifice them for the chance to save countless others he couldn't. It was a calculation that went against every human instinct he possessed. There has to be another way, he said, desperately. Perhaps there is, Zarakai said thoughtfully. You said the network is preparing to receive your people. What exactly are they preparing? Marcus dove back into the data streams, analyzing the coordination patterns with new urgency. What he found made his heart race with a mixture of hope and terror. They're not just planning to attack the human ships, he said. They're planning to capture them. The corrupted organisms are positioning themselves to form what looks like a welcoming party. Beautiful crystal formations, fascinating biological phenomena, everything designed to lure the researchers into direct contact with infected material. A trap, not an ambush. Exactly, which means the research team will have time to study the formations before they realize the danger. Time we might be able to use, for what? Marcus's mind raced through possibilities, discarding options as quickly as he conceived them. Then suddenly he had it. An idea so audacious it made his planned infiltration of the Hive network seem conservative by comparison. We're going to hack their welcome party, he said. Use their own network against them. If I can inject a warning signal into their communication streams, make it look like it's coming from the corrupted plants themselves. You want to make the Devourer network warn your people about the Devourer threat? I want to make the network malfunction in a very specific way. Create false signals that will make the research team suspicious, maybe even make them maintain a safe distance while they investigate. Zarakai considered the plan. It would require you to fully interface with their network. The corruption risk would be enormous, but if it works, we save the research team and learn everything we need to know about Hive communications. And if it fails, we die, your people die, and the Devourers gain access to human technology and biology. Marcus looked at his equipment, then at Zarakai, then at the pulsing crystalline formations around them. The smart thing would be to retreat, contact the Veltar fleet, and let the professional warriors handle the situation. But the smart thing would also mean accepting the loss of the incoming research team. I'm going to do it, he said finally, but I'll need your help to maintain the interface without losing myself to the corruption. Zarakai nodded slowly. Then we do this together, partners to the end, whatever that end may be. As Marcus began the complex process of interfacing with the alien network, he couldn't help but reflect on how much his life had changed in just a few days. He had come to this planet as a solitary researcher, content to study plants in peaceful isolation. Now he was risking everything to save people he had never met, working alongside an alien warrior who had become the closest friend he had ever known. The corruption whispered to him as his consciousness touched the edge of the Hive network, telling him how much simpler it would be to just let events unfold as they would. But Marcus held tight to who he was, a scientist who believed that every life had value, that knowledge should serve the cause of preservation rather than destruction. The real battle was about to begin, and inside the relative safety of Zarakai's crashed ship, Marcus discovered that his understanding of advanced technology had been woefully inadequate. The vessel's interior was a seamless blend of organic and mechanical systems that seemed to respond to Zarakai's thoughts as much as her touch. Bioluminescent displays showed readouts in a flowing script that reminded Marcus of poetry, While the ship's consciousness, for lack of a better term, spoke directly to Zarakai in harmonious tones that bypassed the universal translator entirely. "Your ship is alive," Marcus observed as he watched tendrils of living metal repair themselves around the impact damage. "All Veltar vessels are grown rather than built," Zarakai explained, running her hand along a console that purred like a contented cat. "They are partners in the hunt, not mere tools. This is Whisper of Wind Through Stars, though she has been with me so long that we rarely use formal names." "She?" Marcus couldn't help but smile. Even humans name their ships and refer to them as female. Some things seem to be universal. Whisper is not merely female in designation. She is female in truth. Feltar ships are born, not manufactured. They live, they feel, they mourn when their partners die. Zarakai's expression grew somber. "She grieves for our failure here." Marcus felt humbled by the revelation. His own research equipment, sophisticated as it was by human standards, suddenly seemed crude and lifeless by comparison. "Can she help us understand the Devourer corruption?" "That is what we are about to discover." Zarakai began what appeared to be a complex conversation with the ship, their communication a mixture of spoken words, touch-based commands, and something that might have been telepathy. After several minutes, Whisper of Wind Through Stars began displaying three-dimensional images that took Marcus's breath away. The displays showed the planet as the ship saw it, but not in visible light. Instead, they revealed the flow of life energy across the surface, the connections between different species, the delicate balance of ecosystems. And like a cancer spreading through healthy tissue, Marcus could see the Devourer corruption spreading from hundreds of infection points across the northern continent. "It's worse than you thought," Marcus said grimly. "They're not just on the northern continent. There are infection sites everywhere." "Yes," Zarakai confirmed. "But look closer. Do you see the patterns?" Marcus studied the display more carefully. The corruption wasn't spreading randomly. There were clear pathways, preferential routes that the infection followed. They're following water sources, river systems, underground aquifers, even atmospheric moisture patterns. Partially correct. But what else? Marcus expanded his analysis, looking at the data from multiple angles. Then he saw it. Mineral deposits. They're specifically targeting areas rich in certain crystalline structures, the same structures I've been documenting as enhanced plant growth. Now you begin to understand. The Devourers do not randomly corrupt worlds. They transform them according to a specific pattern, a biological architecture that serves their purposes. But what are those purposes? Before Marcus could answer, Whisper of Wind Through Stars chimed with an urgent warning. The display shifted to show movement across the planet's surface. The scout creatures they had seen earlier were not alone. Larger forms were emerging from hidden locations, and they were all converging on a single point. "Where are they going?" Marcus asked. Zarakai studied the display with growing alarm. "The primary hive. I had hoped it was still forming, but they are further along than I feared. If they complete the transformation there, what happens? The entire planet becomes a spawning ground. Millions of new Devourers will be born, and they will spread to other worlds. This system will become a permanent corruption source, a staging ground for attacks on neighboring systems." Marcus felt the weight of galactic consequences settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about one world anymore. How long do we have? Based on the convergence patterns, perhaps 2 days before the hive reaches critical mass. After that, the transformation becomes irreversible. "Then we need to get to that hive," Marcus said, surprising himself with his decisiveness. Zarakai stared at him. "Dr. Chen, I do not think you understand. The primary hive will be defended by hundreds of Devourers. Even a full hunting pack would hesitate to assault such a position directly. We are one injured warrior and one scientist with no combat training." "Exactly," Marcus said, his scientific mind working through the problem. "Which is why we're not going to assault it directly. We're going to study it, learn how it works, find its weaknesses. And how do you propose we do that without being detected and consumed?" Marcus turned to the ship's consciousness. "Whisper of Wind Through Stars, can you show me the planet's electromagnetic spectrum? All frequencies, not just visible light." The display shifted, revealing the world in a cascade of energy patterns Marcus had never imagined. But what caught his attention was a series of regular pulses emanating from the hive location. They were broadcasting on multiple frequencies, a complex signal that seemed to be coordinating the corruption across the entire planet. "They're not just transforming the biology," Marcus realized. They're creating a communications network. Every infected organism is connected to the hive mind. The Veltar have long suspected this, Zarakai said, but we have never been able to prove it or understand how it functions. But I can, Marcus said excitedly. This is just advanced biochemistry on a planetary scale. If I can tap into their network, learn their communication protocols, I might be able to understand how they coordinate the corruption process. You want to connect your mind to the devourer hive? Zarakai's voice was horrified. That is not study, that is suicide. Not my mind directly, but my equipment can interface with their signals, decode their transmissions. Think of it as eavesdropping on a conversation. We learn their plans, their methods, their weaknesses. Zarakai was quiet for a long moment, considering the proposal. Even if such a thing were possible, the risk would be enormous. If they detect our intrusion, they won't, Marcus said with more confidence than he felt, because we're not going to intrude. We're going to listen, and we're going to do it from a place they would never expect. Which is, Marcus smiled, his plan crystallizing, from inside one of their own corrupted zones. We'll hide among the infected plants, use their own communication network to mask our presence. To them, we'll just be part of the background noise. You propose that we deliberately enter a corruption zone? I propose that we use their own success against them. The corrupted areas are their blind spots. They assume everything there is already under their control, so they don't monitor it as carefully. Zarakai studied the displays showing the corruption spread. It is audacious, foolish beyond measure, and possibly brilliant. High praise from a Veltar warrior. Do not let it go to your head, Dr. Chen. The plan has merit, but the execution will be extraordinarily dangerous. The corruption affects all biological matter. Extended exposure could begin to transform us as well. Marcus felt a chill at that prospect, but pushed it aside. How long can we safely remain in a corrupted area? Unknown. Veltar physiology has some natural resistance, but we have never tested its limits. Your human biology is completely uncharted territory. Then we'll have to be fast. Get in, tap their network, learn what we need to know, and get out before the corruption can take hold. And if we become infected ourselves? Marcus met her golden gaze steadily. Then we make sure our sacrifice means something. We transmit everything we learn to both our peoples. Give them the knowledge they need to fight this threat properly. Zarakai nodded slowly. You truly are willing to die for this cause. I'm willing to live for it, Marcus corrected. But yes, if it comes to that, I'm willing to die for it too. The question is, are you willing to trust a soft-skinned scientist with both our lives? For the first time since he had met her, Zarakai smiled. It transformed her entire face, making her look younger and somehow more dangerous at the same time. Dr. Marcus Chen, she said formally, you may be the strangest human in the galaxy, but you're also possibly the bravest. Yes, I will trust you with our lives, and perhaps if we are very lucky and very clever, we will both live to see the consequences of this madness. Outside the ship, the Devourer scouts continued their systematic sweep of the Crystal Gardens, unaware that their greatest threat wasn't an army of warriors, but a human scientist with an impossible plan and a Veltar Huntress willing to bet everything on human ingenuity. Dawn on Kepler 442b brought with it a revelation that changed everything Marcus thought he knew about the planet he had been studying. As the twin suns rose over the canyon, their light revealed something that his instruments had somehow missed during his months of research. The crystalline plants that he had been so fascinated with weren't plants at all. They are the Devourer's first stage, Zarakai explained as she watched Marcus frantically recalibrate his scanners. Her injuries were healing remarkably fast, a testament to Veltar physiology, though she still moved carefully. The corruption begins with what your people would call a symbiotic relationship. The Devourers introduce a biological agent that enhances the native flora, making it stronger, more beautiful, more efficient at processing nutrients. Marcus felt sick as the implications hit him. The energy readings, the enhanced photosynthesis rates, the way they seemed to be thriving in impossible conditions. I thought I was documenting an evolutionary marvel. You were, Zarakai said grimly, an evolutionary weapon. The enhanced plants become processing centers, converting the planet's biological matter into a form the Devourers can consume. By the time the native species realize what is happening, the corruption has spread too far to stop. But that means... Marcus stared at his datapad, at the hundreds of samples he had collected, the detailed maps he had made of the crystal plant colonies. They're everywhere. The entire southern continent is infected. Yes. And soon the corruption will reach the secondary stage. The plants will begin producing spores that accelerate the transformation of animal life. Within weeks, every living thing on this planet will either be dead or serving the devourer's hunger. Marcus sank to his knees, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his failure. He had been here for 6 months, documenting and even protecting what he thought was unique and beautiful flora. In reality, he had been cataloging the spread of a galactic plague. "I have to contact Earth," he said, reaching for his communication equipment. "Warn them about what's happening here." "If a research team arrives to follow up on my work," Zarakai's hand stopped him. "Your communication will be intercepted. The devourers are not mindless beasts. They possess intelligence, strategy. If they know your people are aware of their presence here, they will accelerate their timeline. This world will be consumed within days rather than weeks." "Then what do we do?" Marcus asked desperately. "How do we stop something that's already taken over an entire continent?" "We don't stop it," Zarakai said. "We understand it. You said yesterday that you wanted to study their corruption, learn how it works. Now you have the perfect laboratory." Marcus looked at her as if she had lost her mind. "You want to study the devourers while they're actively consuming the planet?" "I want to understand why their corruption was successful here," she clarified. "In my years of hunting them, I have seen them fail as often as they succeed. Some worlds resist their influence naturally. Others, like this one, fall quickly. There must be a reason." Despite his horror at the situation, Marcus found his scientific mind engaging with the problem. Environmental factors, genetic compatibility, chemical composition of the native life forms. If we could identify what makes a world vulnerable to their corruption, we might be able to develop countermeasures. Exactly. But we must be careful. The devourers will have scouts watching the infected areas. They will know we are here. As if summoned by her words, a sound echoed across the canyon that made Marcus's blood freeze. It was unlike anything he had ever heard. A combination of insect chittering and whale song that seemed to vibrate through his bones. The crystalline plants around them began to pulse with a sickly green light responding to the call. "We need to move," Zarakai said, her warrior instincts overriding her injuries. "Now!" They gathered their equipment quickly and climbed out of the canyon, Zarakai moving with surprising agility despite her fractured leg. The sound came again, closer this time, and Marcus could see shapes moving among the crystal formations in the distance. "What are they?" he whispered. "Scouts. The devourers' eyes and ears. They're checking on their corruption, making sure the process is proceeding normally. If they detect our presence, they'll know something's wrong," Marcus finished. "Because there shouldn't be any uncorrupted life forms in an infected area." "Precisely. We need to reach my ship. It has shielding that should hide our biosignatures, at least temporarily." They made their way back to the crashed vessel, moving carefully to avoid the areas where the crystal plants grew thickest. As they traveled, Zarakai taught Marcus to recognize the signs of devourer influence. The way the light reflected differently off infected vegetation, the subtle wrongness in the air that spoke of corrupted biochemistry, the absence of certain types of insects and small animals that were apparently among the first casualties of the transformation process. "Your people never taught you to recognize these signs?" Zarakai asked as they took shelter behind a rock formation. "We've never encountered anything like this," Marcus admitted. "Humanity has only been exploring space for a few centuries. Most of our xenobiology experience comes from studying ecosystems that evolve naturally. This kind of biological warfare is completely outside our knowledge base. That may be why the galaxy views your species with suspicion," Zarakai said thoughtfully. "Most civilizations encounter the devourers within their first 1,000 years of space travel. It shapes how they view the universe, how they prepare for threats. Your people's innocence in such matters is unusual. Innocence or ignorance, perhaps both, but also perhaps an advantage. You approach this problem without preconceptions, without the fear and hatred that drives most species when they face the devourers. That may allow you to see solutions that others miss." They reached the crashed ship without incident, but Marcus could see the scout creatures in the distance, moving systematically through the crystal plant colonies. They were unlike anything in his xenobiology databases. Tall angular beings that seemed to be part organic and part crystalline, their forms shifting and flowing like living minerals. "They're beautiful," he said without thinking. Zarakai looked at him sharply. Do not let their appearance deceive you. They are abominations, perversions of natural life. The devourers take the forms of their victims and twist them into something that serves their hunger. But the crystalline elements, Marcus said, his scientific mind analyzing despite the danger, they're not random. There's a pattern to their structure, a biological logic. What if the devourers aren't destroying the native life forms? What if they're trying to improve them? Improve them? Zarakai's voice was incredulous. For what purpose? Think about it, Marcus said, his excitement building despite their precarious situation. Every species I've encountered in my travels has biological limitations. Humans can't process certain toxins, can't survive in extreme temperatures, can't regenerate lost limbs. What if the devourers see these as flaws to be corrected? You're suggesting they believe they're helping? I'm suggesting they might have a completely different understanding of what life should be. From their perspective, organic life as we know it might seem primitive, inefficient, unnecessarily vulnerable. Zarakai was quiet for a long moment, watching the scouts move through the crystal garden. If that were true, she said finally, then everything the Veltar have believed about the devourers would be wrong. We have spent generations hunting what we saw as a plague. But what if we were really fighting what they see as salvation? It doesn't make them right, Marcus said quickly. Even if their intentions are good, they're destroying entire civilizations. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, as we say on Earth. Another of your sayings? One of our oldest. But the point remains valid. Good intentions don't justify genocide even if you believe you're improving the universe. No, Zarakai agreed. They do not. But understanding their motivations might help us find a way to stop them that doesn't require the death of entire species. As they settled into the relative safety of the crashed ship, Marcus began to see the magnitude of what they were attempting. They weren't just trying to save one world from corruption. They were trying to find a new way forward in a conflict that had raged across the galaxy for millennia. It was ambitious to the point of impossibility. But as he looked at Zarakai, seeing the determined set of her jaw and the fierce intelligence in her golden eyes, Marcus began to believe that impossible might just be another word for something that hadn't been tried yet. The real work was about to begin. Marcus had set up his emergency shelter in a cave near the crashed ship, its thermal regulators working overtime to keep the interior comfortable as the desert planet's temperature plummeted with nightfall. Zarakai lay on his sleeping pad, her massive form making the small shelter feel even more cramped. The biofoam had stopped her bleeding, but she was still weak from blood loss and the trauma of the crash. Tell me about your mission, Marcus said as he prepared a nutrient broth that his scanner indicated would be safe for her metabolism. What brought you to this planet? Zarakai's golden eyes tracked his movements. Even injured, she moved like a predator, every gesture controlled and purposeful. I hunt the devourers, she said simply. Marcus paused in his preparation. Devourers? A plague species. They consume everything in their path, leaving dead worlds behind. My people have been tracking this particular swarm for 3 cycles. The trail led here. The universal translator was working better now, but Marcus caught undertones in her voice that the device couldn't convey. Pain, certainly, but also something deeper. Loss, perhaps. Guilt. Did you find them? He asked. Zarakai's jaw tightened. I found them, but I was not prepared for their numbers. They had already begun to corrupt this world's life force. My ship was damaged in the initial attack, and I was forced to crash land. Marcus handed her the bowl of broth. She sniffed it suspiciously before taking a careful sip. Her eyes widened slightly in surprise. It is acceptable, she admitted grudgingly. High praise from a warrior, Marcus said with a small smile. These devourers, what do they look like? I've been studying this planet's ecosystem for months. I haven't seen any signs of major predation or ecosystem disruption. You would not recognize the signs unless you knew what to look for. The devourers do not simply kill and eat. They corrupt the very essence of life itself, turning healthy ecosystems into twisted mockeries of nature. The process begins small, at the cellular level, then spreads. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. Are you saying this planet is infected? The northern continent shows early signs of corruption. If left unchecked, the entire world will be consumed within a standard year. All life will either die or be transformed into something that serves the devourer's hunger. Why didn't you call for backup? Surely your people would send help. Zarakai's expression darkened. I am Veltar. We do not call for help. We hunt alone, and we succeed or die in the attempt. It is our way. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. That's insane. No one can take on a planetary threat alone. You do not understand, Zarakai said, her voice taking on a harder edge. The Veltar are the galaxy's hunters. We are bred for this purpose, trained from birth to track and eliminate threats that lesser species cannot handle. To call for assistance would be to admit weakness, to bring shame upon my lineage. And how's that working out for you? Marcus asked pointedly, gesturing to her injured state. For a moment he thought she might strike him. Her eyes flashed with anger, and her hand moved instinctively toward where her weapon would normally rest. Then she winced as the movement aggravated her ribs and the fight seemed to go out of her. It is not, she admitted quietly. I have failed in my duty. When I am healed, I will attempt to reach my ship's communication array and report my failure to the fleet command. They will send another hunter to complete my mission. Or, Marcus said carefully, you could accept help from someone who knows this planet better than any other hunter they might send. Zarakai looked at him as if he had suggested they dance naked under the moons. You are a plant reader, not a warrior. What could you possibly offer against the devourers? Marcus pulled out his datapad and showed her the comprehensive scans he had taken of the planet's ecosystem over the past 6 months. I'm not just a plant reader. I'm a xenobotanist with specializations in ecosystem analysis and biological adaptation. I know every species of flora and fauna on this continent, their life cycles, their interdependencies, their genetic structures. If these devourers are corrupting life at the cellular level, I would be able to detect the changes and potentially trace them back to their source. Zarakai studied the data with growing interest. Despite her people's apparent disdain for humans, she was clearly intelligent enough to recognize the value of Marcus's work. Your scans are remarkably detailed, she admitted, but knowledge of plants will not help you fight a devourer. They are creatures of pure malevolence, each one capable of killing dozens of trained warriors. Maybe fighting them head-on isn't the answer, Marcus suggested. You said they corrupt ecosystems from the cellular level up. What if instead of hunting the devourers themselves, we targeted the corruption? If I could develop a biological agent that counteracts their influence, we might be able to cleanse infected areas without direct confrontation. Zarakai was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful rather than dismissive. The Veltar have fought the devourers for 1,000 generations. Never have we considered such an approach. We hunt, we kill, we move on to the next threat. It is what we are. Maybe it's time to try a different approach, Marcus said. Work smarter, not harder. My people have a saying, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But sometimes the problem requires a scalpel, not a hammer. Your species has many sayings, Zarakai observed. Is this wisdom or foolishness? Probably both, Marcus admitted with a laugh. But in this case, I think it applies. Let me help you, Zarakai. Not as a subordinate or a backup plan, but as a partner. I learn about these devourers and their corruption. You teach me how to track them. Together, we might actually solve this problem instead of just treating the symptoms. Zarakai's golden eyes studied him intently. You do not understand what you are offering. The devourers are not merely dangerous predators. They are an existential threat to all life in the galaxy. To hunt them is to accept that death is the most likely outcome. I understand perfectly, Marcus said quietly. And I'm still offering. Why? The question seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. Why would you risk your life for a world that is not even your home, for a people you barely know? Marcus considered the question seriously. Why was he willing to do this? Part of it was scientific curiosity, certainly. The devourers represented a biological phenomenon unlike anything he had ever encountered. But there was more to it than that. Because it's the right thing to do, he said finally. And because I think you and I might accomplish something together that neither of us could do alone. Zarakai was silent for a long time, staring into the soft glow of the shelter's heating element. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. In all my years as a hunter, no one has ever offered to stand beside me as an equal. The Veltar hunt alone because we trust no one but ourselves. To accept your offer would go against everything I have been taught, everything I am. Sometimes going against what we've been taught is exactly what we need to do, Marcus said, another long silence. Then, almost reluctantly, Zarakai nodded. Very well, Dr. Marcus Chen. We will attempt this partnership. But know that if we fail, we die together. The Devourers show no mercy to those who oppose them. Then we'd better not fail, Marcus said, extending his hand. Zarakai looked at the offered hand with confusion. What is this gesture? A handshake. It's how humans seal an agreement. Carefully, Zarakai reached out and grasped his hand with her own. Her fingers were longer than his, with sharp nails that could easily have torn his flesh, but her grip was surprisingly gentle. It is done, she said solemnly. Outside the shelter, the alien night was filled with strange sounds and the distant glow of the crystalline plants. Neither Marcus nor Zarakai could have imagined that their unlikely partnership would ultimately reshape not just their own destinies, but the fate of countless worlds across the galaxy. Dr. Marcus Chen adjusted his field scanner for the third time that morning, wiping sweat from his brow as the twin suns of Kepler 4x42b beat down mercilessly on the rocky terrain. The exoplanet's atmosphere was breathable for humans, but the heat was brutal. He had been conducting xenobotanical research here for 6 months, studying the unique crystalline plant life that seemed to thrive in the planet's harsh conditions. Marcus was alone on this expedition, which wasn't unusual for him. Most of his colleagues at the Terran Research Institute thought he was crazy for volunteering for solo missions to unexplored worlds, but Marcus preferred the solitude. It allowed him to work without the constant chatter and politics that plagued multi-person teams. Plus, he had always been better with plants than people. The scanner beeped, indicating an unusual energy signature coming from a canyon about 2 kilometers north. Marcus had been mapping this region for weeks, but this reading was new. The energy pattern didn't match any of the crystalline flora he had cataloged so far. Curious, he packed his equipment and headed toward the source. The canyon was deeper than it appeared from the rim. Marcus rappelled down carefully, his boots scraping against the red-orange rock face. The walls were lined with the same crystal plants he had been studying, their translucent leaves catching and refracting the sunlight into brilliant rainbows. But as he descended, he noticed something else. Scorch marks on the rock, fresh ones. At the bottom of the canyon, Marcus found the source of both the energy reading and the scorch marks. A spacecraft, unlike anything he had ever seen, was embedded nose first into the canyon wall. The hull was a dark, iridescent material that seemed to shift colors as he moved around it. It was clearly alien in design, with flowing curves and organic-looking protrusions that defied human engineering principles. Marcus approached cautiously. First contact protocols were clear about situations like this, but they also assumed he would have immediate communication with Earth Command. Out here on the edge of explored space, he was on his own for at least another week before the next supply ship arrived. As he circled the crashed vessel, he heard something that made his blood run cold. A low-pained sound that was unmistakably organic. Someone or something was alive inside that ship. The sound came again, weaker this time. Marcus made his decision. Protocol or no protocol, he couldn't leave a sentient being to die. He began searching for an entry point. The ship's hull had cracked along several stress lines from the impact. One of the larger cracks was wide enough for Marcus to squeeze through if he removed his backpack. He activated his helmet's recording function and slipped inside. The interior of the ship was as alien as the exterior. Bioluminescent panels provided dim lighting, and the walls had an organic, almost living quality to them. Everything was sized for someone much larger than a human. Marcus had to duck to avoid hitting his head on the ceiling. Following the sounds of distress, he made his way deeper into the ship. The corridor opened into what appeared to be a control room or bridge, and there, trapped beneath a fallen support beam, was the most magnificent and terrifying creature Marcus had ever seen. She was clearly female, though her species was unlike anything in the xenobiology databases. Nearly 3 meters tall with a powerful predatory build that spoke of a lifetime of hunting. Her skin was a deep blue-black that shimmered with an almost metallic sheen, and intricate silver markings covered her arms and face like living tattoos. Her hair was white as starlight and fell in thick braids down her back. But what struck Marcus most were her eyes. They were large and golden with vertical pupils like a cat's, and right now, they were fixed on him with a mixture of pain, suspicion, and something that might have been recognition. She spoke, her voice a low rumble that his universal translator struggled to process. The device finally produced a rough translation. "Human, you should not be here." Marcus raised his hand slowly, showing he was unarmed. "I heard you were hurt. I want to help." The alien female tried to move, but the beam across her legs was too heavy. She winced, and Marcus could see dark blood seeping from wounds on her arms and torso. Her breathing was labored. "I am Zarakai of the hunting fleet," she said, her translator working better now that it had more speech patterns to analyze. "I do not require assistance from a soft skin." Despite her proud words, Marcus could see she was in bad shape. The beam had clearly broken something, and she was losing blood. Without medical attention, she would die within hours. "Maybe not," Marcus said, setting down his backpack and pulling out his medical scanner. "But you're going to get it anyway. I'm Dr. Marcus Chen, xenobotanist, and right now I'm probably the closest thing to a doctor you're going to find." Zarakai watched him warily as he approached. "Why would you help me? Your species and mine are not allies." Marcus paused. He hadn't known there were any relations between humans and her species, good or bad. "Because you're hurt and I can help." "That's reason enough." He knelt beside the beam and examined how it had fallen. The ship's artificial gravity was still functioning, but barely. The beam was made of the same organic-looking material as the rest of the ship, and it was incredibly heavy. Marcus would need to find a way to lift it without causing more damage. "What's your species called?" he asked as he worked, trying to keep her conscious and talking. "We are the Veltar," she replied, "and we are warriors, not weaklings who need rescuing." Marcus smiled despite himself. "Well, this warrior is stuck under a beam and bleeding out. Sometimes even the strongest need help." He rigged a lever system using his climbing gear and some pieces of debris from the crash. It took nearly an hour, but he finally managed to lift the beam enough for Zarakai to pull her legs free. She immediately tried to stand and collapsed. "Easy," Marcus said, catching her before she hit the ground. She was heavier than she looked, all muscle and bone density adapted for a high-gravity world. "Let me check your injuries first." The scan revealed 2 broken ribs, a fractured left leg, and significant blood loss from multiple lacerations, but nothing that couldn't be treated with the medical supplies he carried. Marcus worked quickly, applying biofoam to seal the worst cuts and injecting her with a broad-spectrum painkiller that his scanner indicated should be safe for her physiology. As he worked, Zarakai studied him with those intense golden eyes. "You are not what I expected from a human," she said finally. "What did you expect?" "Treachery, cowardice. The stories of your kind among the Veltar are not favorable." Marcus finished bandaging her ribs and sat back. "Well, I'm just a scientist who happened to be in the neighborhood. Maybe your people haven't met the right humans yet." For the first time since he had found her, Zarakai's expression softened slightly. "Perhaps not," she admitted. Outside the ship, the canyon was growing dark as the twin suns set. Marcus knew they would need to find shelter for the night, and Zarakai was in no condition to travel far. But for now, she was alive, and that was what mattered. What he didn't know was that saving the life of a Veltar Huntress would change everything he thought he knew about the galaxy, about humanity's place in it, and about himself.